As the conversation was progressing, though, I couldn't help but think, we talked a little bit about nurturing those that are at the, what I'll call the beginning spot, or that, as you progress through the advanced education continuum there. We've talked about the LPNs, and maybe as the nursing assistants, they start in the nursing students. Well, I'm going to go to the other end where you've got advanced degrees. We talked a little bit about the DNP, and one of the most hotly debated situations right now in healthcare, or at least what I've been seeing, is the advanced practice nurses and physician assistants looking to be independent in their practice and wanting to be doctors, even though they may have that designation. There's not really creating the defining line of I'm a medical doctor versus I'm a doctor of nursing practice. So we've had guests on our show that have expressed concern. They've written books about this concern. And so I want to give fair airtime to the other side, if you will. And I'm not saying that I'm drawing lines here, but I am curious, what have you seen of that? What are your thoughts on that? Being a nursing leader, I'm very curious what your thoughts are.
Well, as you can imagine, I have a lot of opinion about this. So what's really interesting is when you work in a health system, you get to know a pattern of care that's just accepted by a particular environment. So most of my experience has always been in sort of a large health system or like an academic medical center. So there are residents and medical students, and that creates a different kind of an environment for somebody who is an advanced practice provider, like a nurse or a physician's assistant. However, I moved for 3.5 years to Medical University of South Carolina, and it was one of the most restrictive nurse practice states in the country. So things that I knew nurses could do in Ohio in an advanced practice role, they could not do in South Carolina. What was interesting is that there was individuals from both the College of Nursing at MUSC and the health system that collaborated and worked very hard to change the legislation to allow nurses to practice up to the top of their license in the state. And some of that was around prescribing authority, pronouncing death. Another one was supervision. So it allowed nurses to have, they could do more with less physician presence, in a geographic location. And it took a lot of time. I mean, they were at this for years, but they got the legislation passed. So within that experience, what I watched happen was the same thing that you were describing, Rhonda, and there's a lot at play. One of them is that some advanced practice nurses don't want to be known as a nurse anymore and like to be called doctor. Mm-hmm. Yet for the rural South Carolinian, a doctor means one thing, right, and that's not what you are. So how we title people and what we call them, that gets mucky. I also have to say that when I changed the organizational structure at MUSC and had advanced practice nurses report to the chief nurse, that caused a fury because they didn't want to be associated with me.
I bet it did.
Well, I'm like, but you're an RN. Yeah. And ultimately, I'm accountable for your practice.
That's right.
Whether I like it or not. So you're going to report to me. So it's just interesting ways in which we perceive things. And I will tell you, when I will give you one example of when I got an aha moment about an advanced practice nurse. MUSC in South Carolina has a very extensive telehealth program. They're one of 2 federally funded telehealth programs in the US. And I had never seen telehealth really like we have seen it lately. So I wanted to go visit the area, and of course it's just all a bunch of monitors and cameras, and that was one thing. But they said, you really ought to go watch Kelly Garber. I said, okay, who's Kelly Garber? Well, she's a nurse practitioner, and she does telehealth in the schools. Okay, so I go to Kelly's office. She's right across from the street from the health in an old Victorian, or I don't even know what you would call it down in Charleston, one of those historic homes, right?
Yeah.
And she's sitting at her desk and she dials in to see a student in a school. And it's a county like 2.5 hours away from Charleston. So she's able to, on her monitor with an assistant at the school, look in the kid's ear, which was better than being there in person. She could hear his heart. They did a little cardiovascular check. She looked in his mouth and made a diagnosis of an infection. She, because the parent had already signed an agreement, as she was ending her note, the prescription gets delivered to the pharmacy so that the parent on the way home from work, who never had to leave work, picks up the prescription. It took less than 11 minutes, and I just sat there and thought, wow, why can't we do this a lot? Yeah. Now, the first thing when I tell people the story is, well, you're taking work away from physicians. I said, well, let's think about that. Why can't a nurse practitioner do that? So you can do what you can do best, which is really dig in to these chronic cases. And you know what a physician said? Why make a lot of money on this cheap stuff?
Shame.
I have all these crazy experiences, but what I see is potential.
Yeah.
And if we can figure out ways in which providers can understand their lines of authority but just maximize people's work, we could do some pretty extraordinary things.
Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion today. If you'd like to learn more about our guest, head on over to our Patreon page, where you can access exclusive content, including the full segment of our show. Never want to miss an Inside the Doctor's Lounge clip? Be sure to click the subscribe button to our MD Coaches YouTube channel. As always, we appreciate suggestions for future show topics. Let us know what you're thinking in the comments below. And finally, special thanks to Ryan Jones, who created and performs our theme music for the show.